Local writer and filmmaker Tyquan Morton is taking a leap of faith by developing his first film called High Water, highlighting rising sea levels, land development, and gentrification. I talk one-on-one with Tyquan for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Tyquan Morton, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey Quintin, it's good to connect with you. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you are a writer and filmmaker coming obviously from here in Charleston. In fact, you graduated from the College of Charleston and my favorite university of all, Vanderbilt University in Nashville.
Yeah. So I graduated in 2016 at College of Charleston and in 2022 at Vanderbilt.
Wow, my first time going to Nashville was 2022, so that's amazing. And both schools are great, by the way. But I'm bringing you on Quintin's Close-Ups, Mr. Morton, because obviously you are taking a leap of faith by making your first film this summer called High Water, which you say is a love letter to Charleston and a contemplation about rising sea levels, land development, and gentrification. Tell me, Mr. Morton, why High Water? Why now?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I spent a lot of time in Nashville, and I think I missed home a lot during that time. So I was in Nashville during the COVID years, so I didn't get to come back as much. And since I had been gone and not being able to travel as much back and forth, I really started to notice a lot of changes happening in Charleston, right? A lot of the landmarks and the places that I grew up loving and seeing, those places were changing. A lot of the people that I grew up, a lot of the elders that I grew up with, they were starting to transition. But I also started to realize that a lot of the reasons that those things were happening was because of climate change. It's because of a lot of the gentrification that's happening in Charleston. It's because of the rising property taxes, right? It's so many different reasons. So for me, I wanted to do High Water right now because if not now, then when? That's always one of my philosophies. But I think it's also very important as we think about the state of the city, right? Like, hurricanes are going to get even worse over the next few years. Floodings are going to get even worse over the next few years as well. So for me, it's very important to archive our stories, archive our memories, archive our culture, so that it is able to sustain through all the waves of time and all the ways that are literally coming over the next few years.
What is the story of African Americans in Charleston? What are the memories and what is our culture these days, despite gentrification, high taxes, and of course, land development?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and I think that's a big question. I would say the culture, and I don't want to speak for everyone in Charleston. I think so. I'll say this too: the story of High Water specifically mentions and specifically explores the culture of Gullah Geechee people here in Charleston, right? So Gullah Geechee people specifically are being impacted by the rising sea levels and by the rising property taxes and just all the things that are happening here in Charleston. So I think going back to answering your question about like the state of the culture now, I think everyone is seeing and noticing that some of the culture is in so many ways vanishing, right? So it really is up to people of my generation, people that are younger than me. It really is up for us to hold on to a lot of those cultural values that we grew up with and really just trying to sustain it, but also allowing it to transform a little bit as we grow up and as we develop.
And of course, a lot of people know that I grew up here on the east side of Charleston.
Okay.
And we all know about the cultural values there and in other places here in the Low Country. What exactly are those cultural values that you want to hold on to? And what do you actually want to showcase in this particular film?
Oh man, I love that question. So for me, it's family. Family is so important. This film has so much to do with family. It follows a son who's taking care of his mom who actually has dementia, right? So on one layer, she's experiencing the changes of Charleston, right? But on another layer, she's actually forgetting Charleston, right? So like it really hits. There's also another character. The main character's name is Peter, and his cousin Beverly. She just had to sell her house because property taxes are too high, right? So like this is all scripted, but I guarantee you can ask any Gullah Geechee Black person in Charleston, and they probably have very, very similar stories. I would say another value that's very important for me, and I think that we should sustain, and I'm trying to continuously get better at it, is our spirituality, right? Like our faith has been very essential for us, and has been how we have sustained, how we have become resilient, have remained resilient. And it really is that spirituality that we get from our families, we get from our community, that we get from the environment.
What is the quality of life for those Dalagichi folks in that particular area? Now that most of them have had to sell their houses, some have actually passed on,
Hmm.
and some are actually dealing with real life issues like such as high property taxes.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to speak for everyone. So I'll speak with my experience, and I think that it'll relate.
Okay.
Um, it's hard to find a place to rent or to buy, right? Like how can you maintain or sustain yourself in a city that you have ancestral and familiar bonds with, but it's hard to keep up with the place that you're living in, right? Finding a job has been tough. Finding a job that pays well has been tough. I would say the education system, right? I think it does a really poor job of teaching Gullah Geechee children about themselves and about their history and about their history of resilience and strength and their culture, like red rice, for example, right? Like, how did red rice come from Western Africa and we changed the name, but it has so many similar ingredients and now it's in Charleston, right? Same thing with okra. So
Yeah.
I think even the food ways. So there's a lot of, again, one of the values of this story is really another value I would say is really just the idea of memory, right? Like, in order for us to like strengthen and continue on in this journey of being intact as a culture, we have to continuously remember our values, remember where we came from, and I think we really do that by just being in community and just being connected to our kin.
I know that obviously a lot of people here rely on their faith in God and Jesus Christ.
Mm.
So, how exactly are they keeping their faith and their soul intact throughout all of this?
Yeah, I would say yes. I think especially Charleston being the holy city. I would say yes. Like, definitely, my upbringing is people having their faith through Jesus, and I also feel at the same time we 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 have our faith through the natural resources that have provided us through God, right? Like the land, the water, the air, like all three of those things, those have just been given to us. So I think for me, I grew up in a family, specifically my dad's side, who grew up in Rimley's Point in Mount
Yes.
Pleasant. I grew up with a family who we spent time in the country, as we would call it, not just Rimley's Point, but a little bit further. We spent time by the water. I spent time with my dad fishing, right? And I think now as I get older, I see those as very spiritual moments, moments that we're able to connect with God that's outside of a church. And I think that's what we have access to, especially living here in the Low Country.
What is the biggest difference about Remley's Point? I used to work there a lot for the restaurant group that I used to work for, so I used to work in that area a lot, and I actually have friends who still live there, have own
Mhm.
property there. But what is the biggest difference about Remley Point from when you were growing up to right now?
Oh my gosh, Quentin! I wish we could just like drive around just the neighborhood just to see, right? I would say the houses, right, but also the people that occupy the houses. Like the demographics is dramatically different. I remember, growing up, one that the entire neighborhood was black, right? Like, so Rumley's Point used to be a neighborhood, and I sometimes pronounce it right, but Scallionville, right? So
Right.
it's historically black neighborhood. I think we're starting to call it settlement communities. But you could look at it right now and it doesn't look anywhere comparable to what the demographics were, at least when I was growing up, but I was born in 1994. I would also say that the houses are different, right? Like, a lot of the houses have been torn down of people that have lived there. All the elders have passed. Like, I think in that area the houses are at minimum maybe $2 million, right? Because it's by the water. Like, I can't afford $2 million worth of a house. So I would say entirely the demographic has changed, which that has impacted how the culture has changed in the area too.
I'm looking at Remley's Point in that area in my mind right now. I wish I could go back over there and visit today. But what else has changed in that area over the past 20 years?
Hmm. I would say, I would say, I would say the area of just Mount Pleasant in general, and I'll say this with this context as well, Quentin. I just came back to Charleston but from living in Nashville for 4 years, I just came back to Charleston in June, and I've been gone for about 7 years. So I came back and forth, of course, to visit family. So
Yeah.
I used to see changes kind of very sporadically. But I would say, just kind of going back to what I said previously, I think primarily a lot of the demographics. And that's not just in Remley's Point area. That's really all of Mount Pleasant. That's really all of Charleston. You can go to West Ashley. You can go to James Island. Like, you can go to all these areas, and they may be a little bit further down the maturity of gentrification, if you want to call it that. But it's happening, and it's impacting people.
When did gentrification started creeping up in these settlement communities and historic
Mm.
communities in Charleston?
That's a really good question. I wish I knew the actual answer to that. I do know just for Charleston, just in general, I would say around 2010 is definitely when we started to see a spike just of it in general. But I wish I had a better answer for it, but I don't have the actual number.
Obviously, some people that I talked to over the years, and say that, hey, we can't stop gentrification, but we certainly can
Mhm,
slow it down.
mhm,
What way can you slow down gentrification these days?
hmm. How can you slow it down? I wish I knew the answer to that too, Quentin. Yeah, I really wish I did. I think a lot of it is making sure that people have access to housing that they can afford. I think it also has to deal with, especially people in my generation, right? Like we need more spaces where we can occupy, like black Charlestonians that we can come together. And there are a lot of great spaces. I think when I first I moved back Juneteenth weekend. They had like this thing called Woo Wednesdays down at the
Oh,
Whale, and it was so amazing just to
yeah.
connect with them. Black Charleston, they're so amazing because we're able to connect with each other. But I do think that it is having more spaces and having more resources where people are feeling as though they can have a life that is sustainable and a life that is filled with satisfaction. So I think that's a very general answer, but I think those two things are very, very important.
And shout out, by the way, to another fellow East Sider, David White, who
Okay, cool, yeah.
he does the Woo Wednesdays and all that stuff, and obviously the Dropping Pin as well. Hopefully,
Hmm.
he can come on Quintin's Close Up soon. But what else do you want to bring into that space for African Americans here in Charleston?
Yeah, I would love to see more art, and I say all that to say that there isn't there. There's definitely art in Charleston. I would just love to see so much more. Right, like there's so many amazing artists that I've been able to meet in my time of being back here. But I think art has a lot of power. Art has a lot of power to spark conversations like this. Art has a lot of power to inspire people. It has a lot of power to add to the resiliency of a culture. And that's one of the reasons why that's one of the main reasons why I decided to do High Water again, is just to really contribute to what I would think of as Gullah Geechee cinema or Gullah Geechee art, with this like newer generation that's coming up. So I think Charleston has always been historically a city that has been very involved in social activism, and it historically has been a city that's always been involved in utilizing art to engage in those conversations. So I think if we can have more spaces for that, and not even necessarily serious spaces, right? Playful spaces where Black folks can come together and just have fun and just be in pleasure together, if you will. So I think those spaces would be very, very important.
How were you able to utilize art for High Water?
Yeah, so High Water is a film. So I think the interesting thing about film is that you it uses so many different mediums just within it, right? You have someone that's working on the composition. You have someone like the score for the music. You have someone that's working on the sound effects. You have someone that's working on the color to get it right so it evokes that certain emotions. You have a costume designer. You have Josh Parks, who served as my director of photography, who's an amazing photographer here in Charleston. He helped me to really capture the frame or the composition of the film. So film is a multidisciplinary art form, and because of that, you're able to really unpack and put so many layers of conversations in it.
What other conversations do you want to layer into this particular film, if you could?
Yeah, I want there to be moments where people think about those, I guess, Easter eggs that I've written in the scripts, and I want that to unlock memories for them, right? Like I want us to. There's a line where they mention Captain Don's and they mention Doshers, right?
Right,
And these are places that are no longer here in Charleston or here in West Ashley
right.
specifically, right? But I want those moments to unlock something, not as a yes, moments of grief because we grieve when those places are gone, but also moments for us to share and be in community and laugh, right? Because we all of us probably have so many different memories at those places. So I think that's very important. I would also say another conversation is, yeah, I'd love to be a little bit deeper in conversation about what it means to hold on to what is ours, what it means to sit with what is ours. And that may mean property, that may mean our culture, but just really just trying to think about strategies. I don't have all the answers.
Sure.
Again, I think that this film will be a nice tool for us to be in conversation together about it. But I think that those two things are important for sure.
And I know, obviously, the film is slated to come out this summer, and I'm probably going ahead of myself, Mr. Morton. But so far, what emotions have been evoked from High Water?
Yeah. So yeah, I've done a few test screenings, and I'm hoping to do some more before it's actually premiering here in Charleston. Hopefully in June or July, but definitely this summer. Um, I would say, definitely a lot of. I wouldn't say a lot of. Definitely moments of grief, right? Like I mentioned, I think, but I would say that the film is very lighthearted at the same time. You know, I would say a lot of laughter. I would say a lot of joy at the same time. I would say sometimes some a feeling of like just feelings of somberness, if you will. Um, and yeah, I would also see it maybe even feelings of like conviction for some people, depending on who they are and who's watching.
Right. Speaking of watching, and I know obviously you've been done some test screens already so far for the particular film, but what particular character describes you?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. So I'll give you some background and then I'll answer your question. So uh, my first draft of High Water was actually about a character, or the main character was actually a college student named Xavier, who actually, and this is a character that is actually still in the film, but Xavier, his background is that he's a student at a college here in Charleston, and he majors in historic preservation and he has a lot of he's very idealistic, he's very optimistic, and he has a lot of enthusiasm and zeal, but that oftentimes comes with not knowing all that has come before and all the efforts that have become before. So I would say that Xavier, I resonate with Xavier because that's definitely how I felt when I was going to College of Charleston, right? I'll say this too, like I went to College of Charleston. I think my junior year was when I went there is 2015. So that was the summer, you know, Mother Emanuel. I was going there, Walker Scott. So I was going there in very heavy times, and you know, wanting to use my voice and my art, specifically poetry at the time, to spark conversations and to change, and just really thinking that art was enough. But I realized as I've gotten older that art is a vehicle, but art is never enough. We need policy change, we need like collective action, and we need to be on one accord to try to figure out what changes can be done.
What collective action should be taken when it comes to obviously land development,
Hmm.
flooding, and obviously protecting your own property?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that comes to mind, again, I don't know have all the answers, but I think the one thing that comes to mind is that there needs to be I think that people need to be continue to be involved in the political aspects of what's happening, right? Like, so for example, I went to a city council meeting this past summer. They were talking about some further development in the Hamlin community, right? So many people showed up and so many people advocated for that, for the city council not to allow that to happen. And I think now Hamlin is going through a process of becoming, I can't remember the exact phrase, but essentially becoming protected as an historic neighborhood, right? So that happened because of collective action. That happened because people were all in the same accord. But that also happened because people that may not have looked like the historical residents of Hamlin also showed up and also advocated for it.
Oh man! And I went there for the first time a couple of months ago when I interviewed John Wright about the museum that he wants to bring to Hamlin. So of course I ventured into that neighborhood, amazing neighborhood. But generally speaking, Mr. Morton, when you look around the Low Country, what other neighborhoods or even communities should be protected with this collective action?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I feel like Mount Pleasant definitely has a lot of what people are calling now settlement communities for sure. I would say like all the miles up and down Mount Pleasant, 5 miles, 6 mile.
Mhm.
I think that Rimley's Point is protected as well. I could be wrong about that, but I'd also say Maryville and Ashleyville. You
Sure.
know, so like my mama's side from my daddy's side is from Mount Pleasant, so Rimley's Point specifically.
Okay.
But my mama's side and where I spent a lot of my time growing up was in West Ashley, like off
Okay.
Playground Road, like
Yes.
right in the middle of Maryville and Ashleyville. I grew up at the Little Emmanuel in
Right.
Maryville. So I would say specifically because those two areas I have a heart for and I have a lot of connection to it. But I would say definitely those areas. But you can look in really any big area of Charleston, whether that's Mount Pleasant or West Ashley or James Island or North Charleston, or if you want to get a little bit out of North Charleston, Goose Creek, right? You can look in all those neighborhoods, and I'm sure that you'll find uh, communities that have been historically settled by Gullah Geechee people and Black folk here in Charleston that also deserve a right to be protected from further development.
Now, throughout the short film, Mr. Morton, we see that Peter Rock traveled throughout Remley's Point, as you just mentioned, visiting friends who he grew up with and ancestors at their burial grounds, all while picking up small jobs to make sure he can support his mother. So, what else did Peter Rock actually discover while actually visiting Remley's Point?
Oh, that's a good question. What did he discover? I would say that that's a really good point. What did Peter Rock discover? I think I need to watch it a few times to figure that out. Um, I think that Peter Rock discovered that he's strong. I think throughout the film, we see him in moments where he is defeated, right? So I guess context and background is that we don't see him being laid off, but he was
Right.
like recently laid off at the port. And he's taking care of his mom who has dementia.
Hmm.
And he's seeing the city around him change. So we see a lot of him in these spaces and in these scenes. He's defeated, right? Like he's in a low moment. He's seeing the city change and sometimes feeling like he can't control it. But there is a moment in the film, and people will see it when they see it. But there is a moment in the film where we he lets his guard down, and he gives us we get a chance to see him. He becomes vulnerable, and I think for me too, as a filmmaker and as a poet or writer, I really want Black men to see themselves in ways that are softer and not and seeing that masculinity can be vulnerable and seeing that masculinity can be um, protection, but also, sometimes you need support. Sometimes you need a shoulder to like lean on. So I think his biggest discovery is that even though the places around him are changing, the love that he has between his family, the love that he has between his friends, will always be a bench for him to sit on and a shoulder for him to put his head on.
Hmm. What other vulnerabilities have been exposed because of high water?
Oh, you talk about for me personally?
Well, yeah, well, for that particular community you mentioned.
Yeah. So what other vulnerabilities? I don't know if it's been exposed because of the film.
Hmm.
I'll say that primarily because it's not out just yet. So maybe once it's out, maybe more will come. But I will say since the time of me being back, with us having one a really bad hurricane season and a later one too,
Yes, sir.
and also a lot of the issues that are happening in places like Hamlin. I think the context of Charleston right now is allowing people to be reminded of how much we need to speak up against what's happening and how much we need to continue to educate ourselves about what's happening and how much we need to come together to combat what's happening.
And now that you're actually making this film about obviously those issues such as gentrification and land development and whatnot, what do you want to educate yourself with after this particular film?
Yeah, you're asking all the good questions, Quentin. I appreciate it. So for me, as far as being back home, I want to continue to educate myself on the natural environment,
Cool.
and the connection that we have with the natural environment. So I've been very, being in Nashville, I miss the ocean a lot. So being back home has been very nice. So even just learning a little bit more about the ocean, but I think more on a community level, I would really love to learn a little bit more about how other cities, that are along the coast, so whether it be a port city, whether it be a city that's maybe even in the Caribbean, because I know, Charleston and other cities along the corridor have similarities with the Caribbean, like Barbados as example.
Sure.
But I'm very interested about how they are preserving the
Mm.
places that they have, how they're preserving the land that they're on, and how they're preserving their culture. Because I feel like kind of comparing those or seeing those in different regions and seeing what they do, I think it'll do a good job of informing us. But I think the best change again happens collectively. So maybe there is a bridge between a deeper bridge between Charleston and the Caribbean or Charleston and other port cities.
Where do you see the culture in the next 5 to 10 years?
Wow, where do I see the culture in the next 5 and 10 years? I definitely see it thriving. I see it thriving. I see it being the same but taking new shape. So I guess like not necessarily transforming, but continuing to grow. I
Mm.
think that though I think that though the elders are starting to transition, they've left so many beautiful gems for us, to remember who we are, but also to pass on for the next generation and just to keep us going day by day. And I also feel like, um, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But yes, I'll just stop right
Yeah,
there.
no worries. I'm probably being redundant, Mr. Morton.
No,
But
you're fine.
what do you want to pass on to the next generation through high water?
Mm. So for me, so we have a tagline for the film called "For the Archive." So
Okay.
for me, archival work is very important. Um, it allows the future generation to know that the things that they may be experiencing, there's nothing new. So right, I'm a firm believer that there's nothing new under the sun, and I believe that again because art can be a tool, it can also serve as a tool for them in the future for generation, right? A tool for them to feel motivated, tool for them to figure out how to come together, or tool for them just again to remember who they are. I think all those things and even more are very beautiful and seeds that I want to plant for my younger cousins and my cousins' cousins and their children. So that's very important for me.
And I skipped over this a little bit, but you did the compare the contrast as far as cities and towns and whatnot who are experiencing certain things like we are here in Charleston. And I thought about Nashville once again because I
Mm,
remember back in December of 2022 when I went there for 2 days for a work trip. I remember getting into the Uber with this fella, and he says, "Listen, I've been in Nashville for 50 years, and all I want to do is work hard to protect the areas there,
mm,
Jefferson Street,
yeah.
North Nashville, those places, of course." What's similar between Nashville and Charleston when it comes to land development, property taxes, and of course, gentrification?
Yeah, wow. You're asking all the good questions, Quintin. So yeah, I think Nashville very similar to Charleston. I think there's a lot of similarities between Nashville and Charleston. Nashville and Charleston are Black Nashvilleians and Black Charlestonians. They take pride in their land. I think Nashville's a little bit different, or Tennessee's a little bit different, right? Because you have the mountains, you have the waterfalls, you don't have a beach, but there's a lot of farming out there, right? So
Yes.
like a lot of the friends that I made in the community that are built in Nashville, they have so many stories of their family owning land and their family tending to land and really living off of the land. I'd also say that I would say that where Charleston was, where we saw this like I guess uptick in gentrification. There are a lot of I think Charleston is in its mature stage of it, but there's in Nashville. It probably began in 2022. This like uptick, right? Nashville experienced COVID, and they also experienced a tornado right around the corner. So there's a lot of businesses that closed. There's a lot of businesses that were destroyed. So the city is growing, it's expanding, people are coming,
Yeah.
but rent is being increased, right? Like it's difficult for people to find something that is affordable. So I think there's a lot of similarities when it comes to that specifically. And I think interestingly enough, there's a lot of Charleston businesses, which I won't name, that are actually in Nashville too. So it's this interesting bridge of uh, commerce, if you will, that's between the two cities. So yeah, it's just very, very interesting. And I'm excited to kind of discover a little bit more about what those similarities are.
How does this community, basically develop their commerce to sustain themselves and the communities in the next 5 to 10 years?
Hmm. I would say that I, hmm, I would say that I'm learning the importance of entrepreneurship.
Sure.
So that's the importance of understanding the freedom that comes with it, the independence that comes with it. Depending on the type of entrepreneur you are, the ability to allow that to be supplemental income on top of something that you already have.
Sure.
But in that discovery, I'm also realizing some of the barriers
Mm.
in becoming an entrepreneur, whether it be because of taxes, whether it be because of not having access to a legal team or an accounting team to help you through certain things. So I would say that entrepreneurship and it will be important, but also trying to find a way for entrepreneurship not to be about exploiting the next person, right?
Right.
Trying to find a way for entrepreneurship to be something that is uh, allowing our money to float between us. I think that self reliance is very important, and I think when I think about Nashville, going back to your question as well, and I would say the similarities between Nashville and Charleston is that there already is this amazing network of people that are sharing resources between each other and sharing cash flow between each other and outside as well. But I think that'll be very important.
And mm, what's next for you after high water?
Hmm. After hot water, what is next? I'm gonna go on a few vacations. I don't know where just yet, but I want to prioritize doing
Sure.
some vacations. I'm right now just kind of here and there working on a manuscript for a next piece of a next book of poetry, a next manuscript of poetry. Writing scripts in the background. At some point, I'm sure that those will get developed. But I think for me, I'm really excited to be done with the production of it, so the editing and everything like that, and allowing it to screen. And I'm excited just to see people's reactions
Yeah.
and to see the conversations that are happening because of it.
Can you see yourself developing high water from a film into a book?
Hmm. So that's funny that you asked. So one thing that and I don't know exactly what the timeline, maybe in the next year or two, probably definitely influenced by funding. But one of the things that I definitely want to do is a zine, so like a smaller magazine for High Water that is a collection of whether it be essays or poems or research from people that are or by people that are from Charleston or in this area that is talking about the topics that High Water explores.
Mm. Tyquan Morton with High Water. Thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close Ups.
Thank you, Quentin. It's good to talk to you.
Likewise.